This Vitara is Suzuki's idea of what a small crossover should be. Fashionable, but not entirely fashion-led. In other words, there's a bit of substance mixed in with the style here, and this model's all the better for it. With a choice of petrol or diesel, front or four-wheel drive and styling that's more assured than anything Suzuki has brought us before, it looks to be a strong contender.
Small SUV-style Juke-genre crossover models are all the rage just at present. Every mainstream brand, it seems, must have one. Here's Suzuki's offering for customers in this sector, the surprisingly light, lithe and fashionable Vitara. You'd think this Japanese maker would be well placed to capitalise in this growing market segment. It has, after all, been bringing us small 4x4s since the 70s. And the Vitara name actually dates all the way back to 1988. A Juke-style small crossover model though, essentially little more than a supermini in a pair of hiking boots, is a very different thing. It certainly has little in common with the kind of properly capable small SUVs that Suzuki is used to making. Say for example the old Grand Vitara this car replaced. As a result, in creating its take on compact crossover motoring, the brand had to start from scratch, just like its rivals. Still, clean sheet thinking has its advantages, and the Japanese marque has certainly brought us plenty of that in its approach to this segment. Uniquely, one basic platform and a single set of mechanicals has been used to bring us two crossover models. On one side of your Suzuki showroom sits this fashionable Vitara, there to compete with supermini based crossovers playing to the trendy Nissan Juke and Renault Captur crowd. On the other, you'll find the slightly larger and rather more practical SX4 S-Cross model, which Suzuki rather ambitiously hopes will appeal to buyers of slightly larger, family-sized crossover models like Nissan's Qashqai and Peugeot's 3008. The Vitara will be a stronger seller than its stablemate, more the kind of youthful, dynamic-looking product that buyers of compact crossover models seem to want. On paper, it certainly seems to tick all the Juke genre boxes, with lifestyle looks, trendy cabin technology and supermini standards of efficiency. It even claims to be a rewarding steer on twisty tarmac, which really would make it different from small Suzuki SUVs of the past. There are familiar touches though: value pricing, high specifications and a four-wheel drive option, something actually relatively unusual in this segment. It all sounds quite promising. Time to put this car to the test. Suzuki knows how to do sporty cars. If you doubt that, then ask your dealer to let you have a go in the brand's Swift Sport hot hatch. We can't help thinking that the same engineers have been let loose in this Vitara, for in the first few hundred yards you sense the same eager to please responses and sharp chassis dynamics. It's all a world away from anything you might previously encountered wearing a Vitara badge. But then it would be. The Grand Vitara model that this car replaced was built upon a heavy ladder-framed chassis that was great from the Serengeti, but ponderous and clunky on the school run. This Vitara, in contrast, though not as suitable for forest treks, is in consequence much more comfortable in tarmac territory, lower, lighter and more agile, which in turn allows it to use smaller and more efficient 1.6 litre engines. You get a choice of a petrol or a diesel, and in both cases the power output is 120 PS. The acceleration and top speed figures are identical too. Either way, 62 miles an hour is reached in 11.5 seconds en route to 112 miles an hour. The performance though is delivered in two very different ways. If you don't tow, drive off-road or undertake many long journeys, the petrol power plant will probably suit quite well, and it's very definitely the one to choose if you really enjoy your driving. Derived from the unit used in that Swift Sport model that I just mentioned, it's a revvy little engine that's fun to use, although it can get rather vocal when you're pushing on hard. What it doesn't have is much pulling power, just 156 Newton meters of torque. That'll leave you needing to make frequent use of the 5-speed manual gearbox, which might make the 6-speed automatic transmission option tempting. And either way, it may leave the car feeling a little under strain if you regularly travel fully laden with either people or packages. For that reason, families able to stretch up to this DDIS diesel model may well feel that the extra premium is money well spent. Offering double the torque of the petrol model, 320 Newton meters, it really does pull like a train, enabling a brake towing weight of 1,500 kilograms, up from the 1,200 kilograms the petrol version manages. Even if you're never planning to hitch up, there are times when you really notice the extra grunt this engine produces, say when you're overtaking. Stay in fourth gear, for example, accelerating from 30 to 70 miles an hour, and this car's noticeably more responsive than most other rival diesel models in this segment. Suzuki has also chosen to set this diesel variant up a little more softly than its petrol counterpart, so you don't quite get the same feeling of firmness that makes that petrol version feel so relatively sporty. Even here though, there's an appetite for corners that, as I suggested earlier, will be a revelation to any buyer stepping into this car from the brand's clunky old Grand Vitara. In fact, it'll even be quite impressive if you come to this car after taking a test drive in the mechanically identical but very slightly larger model that Suzuki offers in this segment, the SX4 S-Cross. In short, what we have here is a small crossover that's actually enjoyable to drive, and that is a rarity. As for the reasons why, well, there's plenty of traction, the car's eager to change direction, and body roll is impressively well controlled. You even get a welcome bit of initial bite from the steering when first you turn in, although unfortunately the response gets a bit vaguer the faster you go. Here we've chosen to try a variant equipped with all-grip four-wheel drive. Now this isn't the kind of permanent 4x4 setup that allowed small Suzuki SUVs of the past to penetrate some of the least friendly parts of our planet. Instead, it's one of those lighter, part-time systems, more appropriate for muddy car parks and slippery tarmac terrain. Using an electronically controlled clutch pack that distributes drive between front and rear under orders from the circular drive mode select dial down here by the gear stick. As with most such systems, this one will leave you in front-wheel drive most of the time, unless a lack of traction is detected, in which case the rear wheels will be dialed in. That's what happens if you leave the whole thing in its set-and-forget auto mode. There are three other options though. Sport is meant for more spirited driving, and in this mode, up to 20% of torque is diverted to the rear wheels for livelier handling. Which leaves us with the two options intended for the kind of more serious off-road use that this car will very rarely see. Yes, you get capable approach and departure angles, 18.2 degrees and 28.2 degrees respectively, but the relatively modest 185 millimeters of ground clearance will make it difficult to get anywhere that you could realistically put these to the test. Should you manage that though, two final drive mode select settings are waiting. The main off-piste option is to twist the rotary dial into snow. The name a bit misleading actually, as this is intended for all kinds of slippery, muddy conditions. Here the system will stay in four-wheel drive all the time, constantly varying the power split front and rear depending on the conditions. That'll be ideal the next time you have to venture out on an icy, frozen morning. Finally, there's this lock setting, activated by pushing this button to the left of the drive mode select dial. This splits the torque equally front to rear to give you the maximum chance of extricating your Vitara from somewhere you probably shouldn't have ventured in the first place. This, as we've been saying, is a Vitara for a different age, but it is still very much a Vitara, even if it does only come with 5 doors these days. Visual ties with the 1988 original are maintained by this traditional clamshell bonnet, the front wing vents, the rising feature lines of the flanks, and the shape of the headlights. As you would expect though, this is a more modern interpretation of what a car of this kind should be. Those lamps, for example, are lit by trendy LED projector bulbs on a plush variant like this one. And the nose gets the kind of trapezoidal front bumper section with integrated skid plate that self-marks out the kind of Juke-genre small crossover model that this car wants to be. Sculpted fog lamp housings, offered either in black or, as here, in chrome, sit either side of it, next to the fashionably vertical daytime running lights that add extra overtaking presence. That sense of dynamic attitude is carried through to a profile that ideally needs the enhancement of the dual-tone metallic paint option that you can see here. This gives the entire upper section of the car a contrasting black or white finish, in the process adding a more contemporary feel, emphasised by the rising feature line that I mentioned that sweeps up across the rear door to give the rear haunches some shape. Above it is a razor-sharp upper crease that flows back from the front wing vents all the way through to the rear tail lights. All in all, it's a very assured piece of penmanship. These side body mouldings are part of the optional urban pack that many buyers will want to look at. A package of town-targeted embellishments that also includes this roof spoiler, there to aid this standard rear skid plate in giving a sense of purpose to the tail section. The bottom line is that it's all very different to the rather apologetic looks of this model's SX4 S-Cross showroom stablemate, although that car does hold a significant advantage over this one when it comes to luggage space. Thankfully, there's no side hinged back door here or heavy tailgate mounted spare wheel, these being the things that made access so awkward in the old Grand Vitara. Lift the rear hatch, and there's 375 litres of space on offer, a figure that gets within 55 litres of the capacity you get in an SX4 S-Cross, which isn't bad when you consider that that car is 125mm longer. More importantly, we're talking of a capacity that marginally betters what's on offer from most other small crossovers in this sector. Or at least the standard boot area does anyway. Push forward the split folding rear bench, and the 710 litre space freed up is rather less competitive in segment terms. Still, you can make very good use of the room you do have thanks to this handy adjustable boot floor, which conceals a space beneath, perfect for hiding valuables. Position it correctly and you can also create a completely flat loading area when the seats are folded. Time to take a seat up front. It's an area in which, to be frank, Suzuki really needed to up its game. In this sector of the market, you either produce a properly premium feeling cabin, like that in, say, a Mazda CX-3 or a Peugeot 2008, or you disguise the hard, lower grade plastics necessary to achieve an affordable asking price with the kind of clever, eye-catching design that you'd find in, say, a Nissan Juke or a Fiat 500X. Somewhat predictably, Suzuki has taken the latter approach here. Its attempts to lift the interior, headlined by a round central clock flanked by round ventilation louvers in a row positioned just above a trendy infotainment colour touchscreen. From there, it'll be down to you to draw attention away from the hard, grainy fascia surfaces by ticking various extra cost boxes that will give you a fully colour-coded cabin. This main dashboard panel, the trim around the gear stick, the rings around the air vents and the clock, even the steering wheel and the gear knob can all be colour matched in piano black or, if you're feeling really brave, in either orange, turquoise, white or red. Such token efforts at trendiness will probably be enough to satisfy buyers shopping at the lower end of the range, but folk interested in much pricier variants, like the one that we have here, may be less forgiving. Still, there's plenty to like here. You view a clear set of instruments through a 3-spoke leather-stitched multifunction steering wheel that's easy to adjust with the seat in creation of the kind of highish, commanding position that crossover customers seem to want. That central infotainment touchscreen works quite well too, offered as standard providing you avoid entry-level trim and designed for easy use even if you're wearing gloves. As usual with this kind of feature, it's the main access point for phone and informational functions, plus the optional satellite navigation system. The stereo system's here of course too, though it's a pity you don't get the proper knobs and buttons to control it that you find in Suzuki's alternative SX4 S-Cross model. Still, the steering wheel switchgear alleviates much of the need you have to stab away at the touchscreen. Oddsman space is reasonably well provided for, with properly sized door pockets, a decently shaped glove box and a pair of rather shallow cup holders in the centre console. There's also a useful storage tray in front of the gear lever that'll be ideal for your smartphone, especially as there's a USB point close by. Let's take a seat in the back, an area that can be flooded with light on a top variant like this one, thanks to the fitment of one of the largest panoramic glass roofs you can possibly have on a car of this size. Unfortunately, this feature's twin sliding panel setup does slightly restrict the headroom of taller folk. Still, that caveat aside, there's very little else to complain about when it comes to passenger space back here, provided that you judge by compact class standards. True, it is disappointing that Vitara passengers don't get the sliding rear bench that Suzuki provides in its equivalent SX4 S-Cross model. But even without this, space for legs, elbows and shoulders is all better than the segment norm. And that's because the size of this car is a little larger than the segment norm. To quote just one example, this Suzuki is 40mm longer, 10mm wider and 45mm higher than a rival Nissan Juke. And if you were to get straight out of that car into the back of this one, you'd certainly notice a difference, especially if there were three of you trying to cram in the back here. Compact crossovers, it seems, don't have to be quite so compact. The Vitara buying proposition is fairly simple. One 5-door body style and two 1.6 litre engines, a diesel and a petrol unit, both putting out 120 PS. Go for the petrol unit and there's the £670 option of automatic transmission. And with both engines, if you're prepared to stretch to top spec trim, there's the £1,800 option of all-grip 4-wheel drive if you want it. For the range as a whole, pricing starts at around £14,000 for the lowest spec petrol model, but most Vitara variants sit in the £16,000 to £20,000 bracket. If you're deciding between engines, you'll want to know that there is a £1,500 premium to move from a petrol version to a diesel with the same trim level. That leaves the DDIS diesel lineup starting at around £17,500 and culminating at just under £23,000 for those buyers wanting all the bells and whistles along with off-road traction. Take a close look at Suzuki's model range and you might wonder why this Vitara exists at all. In 2013, the brand did, after all, introduce what at first glance might appear to be a rather similar kind of car, the SX4 S-Cross. That model is certainly similarly priced to this one and uses nearly all of the same mechanicals. It's a slightly bigger thing though, 125mm longer than Vitara, in order to facilitate the bigger boot that Suzuki hopes will enable the SX4 S-Cross to appeal to buyers of slightly larger, more family-orientated crossover models. The Qashqai crowd, in other words. Perhaps more significantly, the S-Cross is a boxier, more practical looking car. Great for families, but not the sort of thing likely to appeal to the kind of crossover customer who'd buy a trendy little Nissan Juke or a Renault Captur. This Vitara, in contrast, is far more fashion-led. It'll look good down at the gym. Your neighbours will ask about it. You'll want to polish it on Sunday mornings. In other words, it's, well, something that Suzuki's never had, a properly credible Juke-genre car. And quite a cleverly targeted one too. Let's take this Vitara's petrol proposition as an example of that. With most cars of this kind, you get an old nail of a petrol engine at the bottom of the range to make the model in question look cheap. Then from there, a big price jump is needed to get yourself a proper modern petrol power plant with sensible fuel economy and emissions. Suzuki hasn't played that old trick here. The Vitara lineup only offers a single 1.6 litre petrol unit and it offers a decent power and efficiency balance across the board, even if you order it in its cheapest form. That gives petrol versions of this car a key advantage over a number of key competitors. Models like Nissan's Juke, Fiat's 500X or Ford's EcoSport. Rival small crossovers like these can certainly get close to the entry-level petrol price of this Vitara, but with any one of them, unless you stump up more cash for a more modern engine, you'll be stuck with something that'll be much more expensive to run. The same issue applies to entry-level petrol versions of the Vauxhall Mokka, the Skoda Yeti and the Jeep Renegade. But there, the problem's compounded as these models cost £2,500 to £3,000 more to buy in the first place. This Suzuki is off to a good start then, with an efficiency proposition that even seems strong against cheap bargain brand contenders in this segment.
cars like SsangYong's Tivoli and Dacia's Duster. With these two models, there actually isn't a more efficient engine to upgrade to, so in owning either of them you'll be stuck with smoky inefficiency that, along with lower residual values, will gradually erode the price saving that you enjoyed up front. That same problem, incidentally, affects the Kia Soul. That's a better product, but in petrol form costs around £1,000 more than a Vitara, while still saddling you with those higher running costs. Not tempting. Of course, we're not saying that all the Suzuki's rivals are relatively thirsty and dirty in their cheapest petrol guises. Cars like base versions of Renault's Captur, Peugeot's 2008 and Citroën C4 Cactus actually better a Vitara in this regard, but that's mainly because they offer less in terms of performance. No, to get a significantly better all-round petrol package of speed and economy in a car of this kind, the bottom line is that you've got to find significantly more money. Either by buying one of the cars I've mentioned that can offer you a more modern engine, or by finding £3,000 to £4,000 more than Suzuki is asking here and getting yourself one of the highest price contenders in the segment, maybe a Mini Countryman, a Mazda CX-3 or a Honda HR-V. Before we move on, I should also say a word about this Vitara's diesel value proposition. Now, at first glance, this isn't as strong, given that getting on for £18,000 is needed for the least expensive DDIS version of this car. Again though, Suzuki has done its homework. Yes, base diesel versions of comparable small crossovers like Nissan's Juke, Renault's Captur, Fiat's 500X, Kia's Soul, Ford's EcoSport, Citroën's C4 Cactus and Peugeot's 2008 all start at a level below this Suzuki in the £15,500 to £16,500 bracket. Suzuki though points out that this Vitara is either slightly bigger, slightly faster or slightly better specified than the cars I've just mentioned, none of which incidentally can be ordered with four-wheel drive. As I've said, that is an option here. The Japanese brand is also keen to remind us that a Vitara DDIS like this one would save you between £1,000 and £2,000 or more over base diesel versions of small crossovers like the Mazda CX-3, the Mini Countryman, the Skoda Yeti, the Jeep Renegade and the Honda HR-V. Ultimately, it's all about the detail, isn't it? And if, having considered that, you conclude that it is a Vitara that you really want, then your decision will seem vindicated when you come to examine this car's standard specification. Even the most affordable petrol SZ4 variant gets alloy wheels of at least 16 inches in size, silver roof rails, front and rear skid plates, air conditioning with a pollen filter, cruise control with a speed limiter, electric mirrors, an alarm immobiliser, central locking, front and rear electric windows, and a decent quality 4-speaker CD stereo with a DAB tuner, a USB input and steering wheel controls. In fact, the only really key item missing is a proper spare wheel, although that does at least free up extra space below the useful adjustable boot floor. Another £1,000 over SZ4 spec will upgrade your Vitara to mid-range SZT trim and get you smarter 17-inch silver-painted alloy wheels, rear privacy glass, front fog lamps and a 7-inch colour infotainment touchscreen via which you access satellite navigation and a smartphone link audio system with Bluetooth connectivity. Most buyers will want to buy in at this level. First, because at launch, SZT spec was the least expensive way of getting this car with DDIS diesel power. And second, because you need this trim level to give yourself access to one of the two very different style packs that many buyers will want, with an extra cost premium of around £1,700 in each case. The urban pack that we have here is targeted at townies, adding body side mouldings, a roof spoiler and chrome-plated front fog lamp bezels. The alternative, rugged pack, meanwhile, aims to emphasise SUV toughness by including more ruggedised front and rear skid plates, black fog lamp bezels, body side mouldings and loading edge protection. Of course, you can go further than that and get an even plusher Vitara if that's what you want. Indeed, at launch, Suzuki insisted that buyers must stretch up to this car's top SZ5 trim level if they wanted the option of that all-grip four-wheel drive system I mentioned earlier. By this point, of course, you'll be paying the kind of money that would get you a really pricey small crossover. So the Japanese brand rewards you appropriately with suede seat fabric, keyless entry, auto headlamps and wipers, power folding mirrors, a huge panoramic sunroof that can fill the cabin with light, and some key additional electronic safety features that I'll cover in a minute. On to options and personalisation. Paintwork is a key thing to get right. As usual, you can pay extra for metallic paint, but you'll probably want to go further and get the dual tone metallic option that we have here. That'll finish the entire upper section of the car in a contrasting colour. That'll usually be black, as here, but more extrovert types who specify a Vitara that's already predominantly black can choose a white roof instead. Issues like these are key for the fashionistas who tend to be attracted to small crossovers of this kind. These are people who may not necessarily want the style packs I mentioned previously, but instead like the idea of uniquely personalising this car, maybe with individual urban pack or rugged pack elements, maybe with extra chrome exterior garnishing or trendier alloy wheels. Inside, there's the option of giving the cabin of your Vitara a more individual theme by colour coordinating different elements. The main dashboard trim panel, the trim around the wheel and gear stick, the finishing of the gear knob and the rings around the air vents and the clock at the top of the centre console. You can choose between 5 themes in colouring these: piano black, orange, turquoise, white or red. You can even have your steering wheel and your carpet mats with coloured stitching. Just be careful not to go too far with all of this. With too much bling, this Suzuki will be difficult to sell on. Less controversial options include the cargo nets, rubber mats, dog guards, separation grills and neat foldable luggage bags that you can get for the boot area. There's even a thermo cooler bag for picnics. As you'd expect, there are also things like rear parking sensors and various tow bars, plus the usual bike carriers, roof racks, ski racks and roof boxes for trips away or family days out. Finally, a word about something that shouldn't cost extra or all need to be personalised: safety. Suzuki agrees, hence this car's use of what the brand calls TECT, or Total Effective Control technology, a design approach based around the extensive use of ultra-high tensile steel for greater impact absorption. As a result, this car was one of the first to be awarded a top 5-star assessment in Euro NCAP's more rigorous testing programme. A 5-star showing actually means something now. Another of the reasons it may have been awarded here is that the standard safety tally includes the driver's knee bag that many rivals make you do without. That's part of a kit list including twin front, side and curtain airbags, Isofix child seat fastenings, a pedestrian-friendly bonnet and a tyre pressure monitoring system. As for electronic aids, well, as you'd expect, there's ESP, stability control and ABS brakes with a brake assist function to help in emergency stops. There's also a hill hold control to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. And on all grip 4-wheel drive models, hill descent control to ease you down slippery slopes. If you want to go further than that, you'll need this top SZ5 spec model. This includes radar technology offering 2 key additional features. First up is an RBS radar brake support system that scans the road ahead of you as you drive in search of potential accident hazards. If one is detected, you'll be warned as the brakes are simultaneously primed. If you don't respond, or you aren't able to, then the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. At higher speeds for motorway travel, you'll also be glad of the second key radar-enabled feature, the adaptive cruise control system. This setup is able on the highway to automatically vary your speed to suit the prevailing traffic. The idea of a small crossover Juke-genre model is to provide lifestyle SUV-ness with near supermini style running costs. That's a target this Vitara gets pretty close to, mainly because it's so much lighter than most of its rivals. Thanks mainly to the extensive use of light, ultra-high tensile steel, the entry-level petrol version tips the scales at just 1,075 kilograms, almost exactly the same weight as a conventional Fiesta-style supermini, and nearly 100 kilograms, or to put it another way, the combined weight of an ordinary adult and child, lighter than a rival Nissan Juke. Even the heaviest Vitara, a diesel four-wheel drive model like the one I'm trying here, has a curb weight of under 1,300 kilograms. It's worth mentioning that Suzuki's mechanically identical SX4 S-Cross small SUV is also 100 kilograms heavier than this car, hence running costs for that model are about 5% higher than you get here. Time to get specific on this car's facts and figures. A base 1.6 litre petrol Vitara manages 53.3 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 123 grams per kilometre of CO2. Opt for one with an automatic gearbox and you'll hit those readings by about 5%. Overall, that's not the strongest showing in the segment, but it does make the Suzuki between 5 and 10% cleaner and more frugal than base petrol versions of rival small crossovers like Nissan's Juke, Ford's EcoSport, Vauxhall's Mokka, Skoda's Yeti, Kia's Soul and Fiat's 500X. True, there are petrol-powered small crossover rivals that can do better, but these tend to either saddle you with less power or a higher asking price, and sometimes both. Bear in mind too that very few cars in this class can offer the four-wheel drive option that's available to Vitara customers. The all-grip four-wheel drive system that's optional here is one of those on-demand setups that only kicks in when necessary. So as a result, a 4x4 petrol-powered version of this Suzuki is still quite economical, in manual form returning 50.4 miles per gallon and 130 grams per kilometre of CO2. Here we're trying the DDIS diesel variant, where those figures improve to 70.6 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 106 grams per kilometre of CO2. This, probably not coincidentally, is almost identical to the showing you get from a diesel Nissan Juke. Once more, the impact of all-grip four-wheel drive is quite marginal, the figures falling only to 67.2 miles per gallon and 111 grams per kilometre. Again, to give you some perspective, that means you could run a four-wheel drive diesel Suzuki Vitara and yet still return much better running costs than you'd get from the most frugal two-wheel drive diesel versions of small crossovers like Ford's EcoSport, Vauxhall's Mokka, Kia's Soul, Skoda's Yeti or Jeep's Renegade, which is quite impressive. What else? Service intervals are every 12,500 miles, whichever engine you choose. And Suzuki offers a range of fixed cost servicing packages. Insurance, you're looking at groupings ranging between 11E and 13E for petrol models and 17E to 21A for the diesels. The warranty is the usual 3-year, 60,000 mile affair, and there's a year of pan-European roadside assistance, plus a 12-year perforation warranty. Finally, residual values are forecasted to be acceptable by general class standards, provided that you don't get too individualistic and personal with optioning up your car.
Customers wanting a small crossover of this kind now have so much choice that for many of them it must be difficult to know where to start. If that's the case for you, then beginning your search by looking at a great all-rounder in this segment seems to make a lot of sense. And this Vitara is certainly that. In this film, we've looked at some of the reasons why. The way the affordably priced base petrol version is so much more efficient than many cheap petrol-powered rivals. The extra space you get inside compared to key competitors like Nissan's Juke. And the high standards of specification that'll sugar the showroom proposition. Plus, for what it's worth, this Vitara is also a bit more capable in poor conditions than most of the alternative choices you could make, provided that you can stretch up to one of the pricey all-grip 4x4 models. It's not perfect, of course. We'd like more affordable diesel and four-wheel drive options and a higher quality cabin when Suzuki gets around to updating this car. For the time being though, there's much to like here, especially in terms of a driving experience involving enough to make other cars of this kind feel dull and compromised. On top of that, there's technology, strong standards of safety and lots of user friendliness. Plus, plenty of scope for individualization, should you want that. This is, in other words, in every sense, a Vitara for the modern world. A car that's a little more than just a fashion statement.